Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
So today we are going to hear an exciting tale in the life of Monroe Scherer. So today we are here to hear my life in the theater.
When we were young, teenage or before, and you go to see a show or a movie, some of us, maybe all of us at one time or another, have the feeling, gee, I'd like to do that. I'd like to be up on stage. I'd like to be kissing a screen goddess or god and have them pretend they're in love with me. Well, that's stage and screen when we're young, but we know we quickly outgrow that and we put it aside for the rest of our lives. In fact, I'm sure there's nobody in this audience who has ever actually been on an active stage addressing an audience in a play on Broadway or a major theater. So we put that aside and forget it. My first experience with the theater, if you can call it that, was at PS 167 in Brooklyn, New York, where the teacher put on a play, if that's what you can call it, for the parents of the first graders. I don't remember much about the play except that I was in it and I had a line. All I remember is that somebody sang, "I dream of Jeannie with the light brown hair." It wasn't me, it was somebody else. The same year, the year I was 7, my father, for my birthday, gave me a copy of the book Alice in Wonderland, which I devoured, not understanding much of it. But by the summer of 1933, my father took me to an actual theater for the first performance of a play I had ever seen. The play was Alice in Wonderland, just like the book, prepared, directed, and written by Eva Le Gallienne, a famous actress of the 1920s. Well, I saw the play, enjoyed the play, but it immediately turned me into a movie critic. How dare she, thought I to myself, take characters from Through the Looking Glass and put them into a play called Alice in Wonderland. That was not to be done. How little I knew about how things get transcribed from book or play to movie to stage to screen. Well, that was my first exposure to an actual theater. It wasn't until some years later, when I was 12, that I actually, again, got to participate in a show that was put on. I was 12. That summer, my mother had sent me to a camp, an all-boys camp called Camp Airy, which was in Thurmont, Maryland. On one side of the lake was the all-boys camp, Camp Airy. On the other side of the lake was the girls' camp, Camp Louise. And the social engagements were like this. On Friday, those girls who were interested were bussed over to Camp Airy to spend the evening playing games and whatever the staff could arrange for us. And on Saturday night, the boys from Camp Airy went over to Camp Louise to socialize, shall we say, with the girls. Well, the year I was there, I was 12. We put on a show for the girls. An ambitious show, I might say. It was Gilbert and Sullivan's HMS Pinafore, a full musical with piano, with chorus, with actors, if you can call us that, playing the various roles. For those of you who don't remember, the plot was about a daughter of the captain of the ship HMS Pinafore, who fell in love with a sailor because of class differences, she couldn't get together with him. Well, it was all a mixture which was arranged. My point, involving me, is that it was a character in that show called excuse me, Sir Joseph Porter, KCB. It's the KCB that throws me all the time. Knight Commander of the Bath, the head of the Admiralty. But that's not the important thing. That was the man who was supposed to marry Josephine, the daughter of the captain. So it was a pretty important role. No, I didn't get the role. My 12-year soprano forbade it. I was one of Sir Joseph Porter's sisters and cousins and aunts, the female chorus, all sung by boy sopranos of Camp area. So that was my experience of being on stage. During the war, as I was growing up in high school, my father, who was a theater buff, used to take me to a lot of plays, as he had Alice in Wonderland. During the war, many plays were written about and performed about the war. Tomorrow the World was one, Watch on the Rhine was another, Mission to Moscow, and in all of them, I enjoyed going to the theater with my father. On 2 special occasions, he even had opening night tickets to shows. Thanks to a friend of his, he was able to get 1 ticket to the opening night of Shakespeare's Othello in 1943, where Othello was played by Paul Robeson, the first time in American history that a black Shakespearean character was played by a black American actor. It was an amazing performance and experience. The theater was filled with luminaries from the theater world. I was sitting right behind Greer Garson, I remember, with flaming red hair. Of course, she was down in the orchestra and I was up in the balcony. Other shows that, well, before I go, Camp Airy. The following year, my voice had changed. And on one Saturday night, I walked hand in hand with Arlene into the Rose Garden. But that's not part of a story about theater, is it? Well, in addition to the first performance of Othello, my father took me to another first performance, an amazing play called Pretty Little Parlor. I'm sure you all remember it. It closed after the 3rd performance. I graduated, went into the Army, and even in the Army, on one occasion, overseas, I was able to see the performance of a show. The show was This Is the Army by Irving Berlin, that some of you may be aware of. And believe it or not, with the old service character, I was able to see that while I was stationed in the Pacific on the island of Saipan. Well, the war ended. I went to college under the GI Bill, got married, started raising a family. I didn't have time for theater. I didn't have money for theater to go. I had no desire to perform, and so the years went by. Some years later, with my children already growing, I and a group of friends of mine used to go to an off-Broadway semi-professional theater group called the Amato Opera. Of course, tickets for the Metropolitan Opera were far too expensive for me, but to go to the Amato Opera was a real theater experience because you were right near the singers. Frank Brandt was a man who was involved with the Amato Opera. He was a producer, he was a director, stagehand, whatever. And Frank decided that despite his involvement with the Amato Opera, he wanted to be involved with a drama group. And since he lived in Brooklyn, where I live, it was an ideal goal for him to set up an amateur theater group in Brooklyn that could perform occasional plays. As a matter of fact, Frank found an old established mansion on Prospect Park west of Brooklyn, which had a small stage as part of the construction of the building. So we were all set. We had a stage, we had a director, and we had a cast. Well, to begin with, Frank was smart enough to know that many of the shows that he was interested in were copyrighted. So he wrote to the owner of the copyright saying, "We have a non-professional group. Could we perform your play for 1 or 2 nights and not have to pay for it?" And in almost every case, the theater directors or the owners agreed to that arrangement, so we were able to put on actual plays without having it cost us. And of course, the audience was entitled to make a small contribution to the Brooklyn Ethical Players. He started off, one more thing. Because he was associated with the Amato Opera, Frank Brandt was able to establish costumes, props for the shows that he believed in. So it was really wigs too. So it was really easy for us to put on a production feeling that we were indeed the characters that we were portraying. But Frank started on a small scale, not by putting on plays, but by doing dramatic readings. And so we put on readings, for example, based on the works of Mark Twain. I remember one of the first ones we had was called The Diary of Adam and Eve. Now there's a piece of Mark Twain I'm sure you haven't heard of. We put it on. Also, of course, we had our own playwright. Arthur Meyer was a man whose family owned a liquor store. And since he worked in the liquor store, he had lots of time during the day, especially in the morning, to arrange or write plays or productions for our little theater group. One of the first ones he did was on using the words of Abraham Lincoln. "This house divided against itself cannot stand," said Mark Twain, according to Arthur Meyer. But he also said, "If I could save the Union by freeing the slaves, I would do it." Lincoln. "If I were able to save the Union by keeping all the slaves in bondage, I would do it. And if I could save the Union by freeing some slaves and keeping others in bondage, I would do it." So where does that fit in with a house divided cannot stand? But that's the kind of insights you got from our little reading group. He also did a terrific job taking some quotes from congressional hearings, putting them together as they were appeared, and making some of our congressional representatives look pretty foolish. But the final and major play that we put on, and some of you may be familiar with it, was based on the Spoon River Anthology by Edgar Lee Master, which, for those of you who may not be familiar with, is a series of poems or recitations by people from the graveyard of the town of Spoon River, each one telling in a few lines his or her own story. And not only that, some of them the relationships between us. And our hardy group read through these lines, and the audience, I must say, even though it was just a reading, was enthralled, excited. So if you're ever in the library, look up Spoon River Anthology. Finally, it was time to take the plunge and really put on plays. And I remember one of the very first ones was a play called Varpone by Ben Jonson, performed in 1606. So you see, we really had honors of the Elizabethan theater that we could put on a play in a modern adaptation. Well, Varpone was an elderly, rich man with no children who decided to play a trick on his friends. He had several friends who were looking to inherit his wealth since he didn't have any children. And so he invited his servant Mosca. Volpone, by the way, means sly fox. Mosca means the fly. So he invited one of his friends, one of his colleagues, to come and donate his money to Varpone. I need it while I'm sick, but once I'm dead, you'll get all of my estates, and you'll get it back much greater volume than you did. So the man donated his money to Varpone. I played the role of Vartore. Vartore was the lawyer. The lawyer, of course, was the one who was trying to extract the money from Varpone. And there was a third character trying to inherit called Carpaccio, the raven. And what did the raven have that Varpone wanted? A beautiful young wife. Well, you know how that turned out. Varpone succeeded, but in the end, with all the machinations of the lawyer, the one who wound up with the money was Mosca. He wound up rich, whereas Varpone wound up poor, but at least he had Celia, the wife. Most of the plays that we put on were comedies or satires, but we did put on some serious work, and I'd like to call your attention to the most serious play we put on, which was called 27 Wagons Filled with Cotton. Now, I doubt if any of you have ever heard of it, and certainly none of you have seen it, so I'm going to have to summarize the play for you. It was by Tennessee Williams, so you know pretty much what to expect. And because I've now had several experiences, Frank, our leader, asked me to direct the play. Directing a play is a great experience. I mean, where else can you have an opportunity of saying to everybody who you see, I want you to do it this way, I want you to do it that way, and they have to follow you. For example, one of the characters, Silvo, comes on stage. He's furious. And the man who played the role in our production started out by going on stage and talking. And we said, that's not how you explain that you're furious. You go on stage like this and you look at the audience. And then you explain why you're angry. Well, what happens is the play 27 Wagons Full of Cotton is a 4-character play. The first character is called Archie, a southern gin mill, middle-aged gin mill owner whose gin mill is kind of in poor condition. He's also engaged, no, he's married to a young woman, teenage, a rather immature young woman. And in order to have her marry him, Archie promised the father of this young woman that he would not complete the marriage until she was no longer a teenager. And so she lived with him, but she also lived with a chaperone, an older woman, her aunt, who made sure that Archie never touched his bride. The 4th character was Silva Vaccaro, a man who had built a brand new modern gin mill, cotton gin mill, which had taken most, if not all, the work away from our friend Archie. Now Archie was facing bankruptcy. He wasn't mad, he couldn't have relations with his wife, a very frustrated man. So what did Archie do? He set fire to Silva Vaccaro's gin mill. Well, Vaccaro, being a stranger in town and a foreigner, could not prove this, but he set out to do so. What Silva did was approach Archie. He said, I can't gin the cotton, I want you to do so. And while Archie was away working, Vaccaro came to his house and started action on the young wife. Well, this being Tennessee Williams, you know how that's going to come out. The fact is that he not only got the young bride to have relations with him, but he also had her sign an affidavit that Archie had set fire to his gin mill. Well, that's the story of the play. Now, as I mentioned, this play had rarely been performed, and none of you have seen it. But I wonder if you have not seen the movie on which was based on this play, the most notorious film of 1956. Many of you may be aware of the controversy surrounding Baby Doll, who is the name of the young wife, because of the implications of the seduction, of the fire, of the entire plot, and of course, Tennessee Williams always had trouble with censors. Okay. Most of our plays, however, were fairly that serious. There were plays about crooks. Well, let me just say, we use Poe's short stories as developed by Arthur Meyer, The Black Cat, for example. We also had plays, comic shorts plays by other authors. For example, one was called The Still Alarm by George S. Kaufman, a very well-known screenwriter who wrote comedies during the 30s. The Still Alarm has a cast of 5 characters, all male as it happened. So we open on the scene where there are 2 men sitting and playing cards in a hotel. And it's pretty warm in the room, so they call a bellhop, please bring us some ice water. And the bellhop disappears. And after they play some more, they call the bellhop, it's getting hot, please bring us some ice water. And the bellhop disappears. At which time, 2 firemen enter the room and tell the players, sir, the hotel is on fire. I was fireman number 1 who delivers the bad news. But you know, these are sophisticated people. They don't react to alarming news. They continue to play cards. So, the fireman says to the players, do you have a cigar, anybody? And one of the players says, yes, I happen to have a cigar. And while I can't do it in person now, let me tell you what I did. I put my hands behind my back. I turned around, walked to the back of the stage, leaned over, and came up with a lit cigar. So, you know, we were pretty sophisticated in the tricks we did. But as I said, other plays were very popular because Thurber, for example, 2 plays of his, The Unicorn in the Garden, which some of you may be familiar with, where a man tells his wife, there's a unicorn in the garden, and the wife says, the unicorn is unicorn is a mythical beast. Okay. And then he says again, there's a unicorn in the garden. And she says the unicorn is a mythical beast. Well, after 3 times, the wife decides she's had enough. It's obvious that her husband is losing it. So she calls the medical department, and they come and they say to the husband, did you see a unicorn in the garden? And the husband says, the unicorn is a mythical beast. So they take the wife away. I mean, that's the kind of trivial play we did. But more important than that was the play that you may or may not know. It's The Princess and the Tin Box. The story is a simple one. And the cast consisted of a king, his daughter the princess, and 5 princes. And the king wants his daughter to be married, so he invites the princes of neighborhood realms to come and bring gifts to the princess, and she will pick the one she will marry. 5 princes. So the first prince comes and he brings as a gift a magnificent golden apple as big as this room almost. Very impressive. The second prince comes and he brings he claims he has a large estate, acres and acres, with animals and horses and wonderful scenery, and she can have it as his gift to her. The third prince brings diamonds and jewelries and necklaces and pins. And he says, this will all be yours, to the princess. I was the director of this play as well, and it struck me as repeating the stories like this, the audience would get bored. So I had to make a change for the fourth prince, who was played by me. So what did I do? I decided to make the fourth prince the fairy prince with a complete gay personality. He was going to bring her gowns and hats and shoes and other drapery for her body. Well, you know, today that would be looked upon as something very unpleasant and undesirable. But for goodness sake, it was 50 years ago. Give me a break. So, on Friday night, we gave the performance. And, oh, excuse me, the fifth king, the fifth prince, was from a poor kingdom and had no money. And the kingdom had been robbed of speculators and all kinds of things. So he had no money. So when he came, he brought a box filled with stones that he had picked up on the way to visit the princess. But he was the handsomest, he was the strongest, he was the brightest of all the princes. Well, the princess made her choice. And as I say, on Friday night, the performance went beautifully. The applause was great, and everybody laughed at the answer to who was the prince who won the princess's hand. However, on the second performance, one of the neighbors who came had brought his 6-year-old son. And the first prince made his presentation, and the second prince made his presentation, and the third prince made his presentation, and the fourth prince made his And the little boy looked up and said, "It's a boy!" Ruined the whole show. So that was the biggest laugh of the show, and I must tell you, who did the princess choose as her husband? She chose the third prince, who brought the jewelry and gold and diamonds. Because, as Thurber wrote, the moral of this story is, all those who thought the princess married the tin box will stay after this presentation and write 100 times, "I would rather have a stone than a diamond necklace," which obviously was not the case. The play group met for off and on for about 10 years. Frank Brandt retired from his business. He retired from the Amato Opera. He retired from our little family group of players and returned all the sets and props and wigs. I read a beautiful wig for being the fairy prince. Back to the Amato, and the group dissolved. And I assumed that after a few years, it would be the last time that I would actually be in a play. Because, frankly, maybe we were getting a little tired of it after all that time. And rehearsals and memory of our productions. But I must say one thing. You're all familiar with the fact that in theater groups, in plays, when you're one actor and you're making love on the stage to an actress or vice versa, day after day after day, production after production, there's always going to be a little hanky-panky playing around, relationships that are not legally sanctified. Well, I told you about the story about 27 wagon loads of cotton. Now you would know that that sort of behavior would never occur in amateur theater groups. Yet as the director of that play, it was easy for me to spot that the actor who played Silva, the Italian, and the woman who played the aunt, well, that's it. They were having their own fun and games. So you see, be careful and stay away from theater productions. I wonder if any of you noticed that this past Monday was the birthday anniversary of Carrie Fisher. And I'm sure you all know who Carrie Fisher was. If she was still alive, she would have been 68 this past Monday. Carrie Fisher, of course, was Princess Leia in this great series of movies, Star Wars. Carrie Fisher was also in many other productions and many other movies, not on the stage, but movies. She was also a screenwriter, she was a director, she wrote a book, Postcards from the Edge, but she was also an extremely troubled woman. Carrie Fisher was bipolar. Carrie Fisher was a drug addict. Carrie Fisher was the daughter of Debbie Reynolds, the cute young thing who appeared early in musical movies, and Eddie Fisher, who was a very popular song singer. His most famous song was Cindy, oh Cindy, which you may or may not remember, long time ago. And he was supposed to be, according to the movie magazines, a very happy person, a very honest group, a wonderful couple. They happened to be friends of Elizabeth Taylor and her third husband, Mike Todd. Mike Todd was a producer. He was not a star, but he was well known. Around the World in 80 Days was his show. But Mike Todd, after a few years married to Elizabeth Taylor, was killed in an airplane accident. And to help the widow get over her loss, Eddie Fisher left Debbie and went to Elizabeth Taylor. And as Carrie Fisher reported it, he went there to be by her side and gradually worked his way to her front. I mentioned that Carrie Fisher's life was turmoil. She had many lovers. For example, the singer Paul Simon. She had an affair with Harrison Ford, the leading actor in the Star Wars. She had a son with a man who turned out to be gay and left her for another man. She had one lover who died in her bed after a night of lovemaking. I mean, if you read her story that she wrote, and the biography called, her story was Postcards from the Edge, and the biography is called Carrie Fisher, Life on the Edge. An extremely troubled woman, and was reported, of course, in all the journals, this problem, that trouble. She seemed, however, to put everything aside when she was going to act. Early in the 2000s, Carrie Fisher wrote a one-woman play for herself, Wishful Drinking, which is why it ends up in my story. A one-woman what she did was she had props from all her movies, little markups of Princess Leia, markups of the famous hairpiece that she wore in the movies. She had videos of some of the activities, the sexual goings on between men and women, or women and whatever. And she made it into a 2-hour Broadway, or I should say legitimate theater production. And she got on stage, already a different Carrie from the one you remember, heavy, with the wig from the Star Wars, and for an hour she talked about the goings on in Hollywood, the relationships between men and women. In fact, she pointed out that her daughter asked her if one of the boys that she was dating was not in some way related to the family, which could have been. Well, in November of 2009, my group of friends, I think there were 3 couples, went to the theater on Broadway to see the show Wishful Drinking. And it was a funny show, and the first act ended, and Carrie Fisher goes to the front of the stage and points her finger at me. My friends say, go, go, go. We had no idea what to expect. So I walked up onto the stage. Carrie Fisher gives me a great big hug. She puts the wig, the Princess Leia wig, on me, and she hands me a sheet of paper, and she says, look at the audience and see what you have. And so, for 4 sentences, I concluded Act 1 of Wishful Drinking, with me facing a theater full of audience and with my stage voice like I had when I was working with the theater group. We will return for the 2nd act. And the audience went crazy applauding me. The curtain came down, and Carrie Fisher hugged me. And she said to me, to my darling Monroe, I love you, Carrie Fisher, and handed me a gift for my performance. Now, I don't know how much of this you can see, but it's a series of mini cookie pans. Or as Carrie calls them, pecker cupcake pans. Well, my friends, I actually made it. It was my dream to be able to be on a stage in the Broadway theater, to face an audience and have, at the end of the play, the curtain come down. Because remember, when you're making a movie, there's no audience for the movie as you make it. But when you do a play, you know at the end of the play, if the audience stands up and cheers, you've done a job. And I felt, to my satisfaction, I had finally reached the highest goal of a would-be actor,